Jonathan Katz is a distinguished curator, postmodern scholar, teacher, and writer, a specialist in the arts of the Cold War era. Katz is presently completing a new book, The Silent Camp, Jasper Johns, Robert Rauschenberg, and Cold War, to be published by the University of Chicago Press. One of several exhibitions to note, and he's worked with several, and he was the co-curator with David Ward of Hide and Seek, Difference and Desire, the same title as the book he published, in American Portraiture. It was the first queer exhibition ever mounted in a major U.S. museum, which opened at the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery in 2010, then traveled to Brooklyn and Tacoma museums. Hide and Seek received the 2011 Best National Museum Show from the U.S. section of the International Association of Art Critics, and was voted the best LGBT nonfiction in 2011 by the American Library Association for its accompanying book. Please welcome Jonathan Katz.
Thank you very much. And Jim, thank you for inviting me, especially on such a momentous occasion as your retirement. I'm truly touched. I wanted to give a little bit of an overview about Warhol to give context to the exhibition. And the first thing I want to say is that the Warhol we know is this Warhol. This is, of course, one of his gigantic Rorschach paintings. This is about 10 feet tall. And he said famously, everybody is always calling me a mirror. And when a mirror looks into a mirror, what is there to see? In his book, A to B and Back Again, he actually looks at me and describes what he sees. And as he describes what he sees, he says, look at that face, the pale skin, the wan complexion, almost cadaverous. And he goes on to list a whole series of adjectives describing what he's seeing that are truly horrifying and by no means flattering. And then I started thinking about why he would do that, why he would say, that's what I see in a mirror. And I realized that all of those terms were actually things that journalists had used to describe him. So what Warhol is doing is describing himself according to the way others see him. He is literally being a mirror. But it wasn't always that way. And I want to begin here in 1956 with a shot of a painting that was a proposal for the Tanager Gallery in New York, a gallery that was associated with abstract expressionism, and thus with the biggest, most macho facsimile of the Wild West, at least in New York's Greenwich Village. And what was striking about this is its boldness, because the show was to be called Boys Kissing. And in 1956, at a moment when homosexuality is literally illegal, Andy Warhol proposes this show to none other than Willem de Kooning. Of course, it's turned down, but it doesn't stop him from doing so. And he knew it would be turned down. It was the gesture that mattered. He goes on to produce a series of drawings such as this one. It has a heart on. And what's so striking about these is their frankness. But very quickly, Warhol came to realize something, which is that success in the mainstream high art universe necessitated a kind of recloseting, a way of thinking about his sexuality that wasn't so obvious and overt. And so he begins a makeover. He begins to make his art much less gay, and actually later would put much of the sexuality into his filmic work. But even though he started out as and you can see that here, as a commercial designer, in fact was one of the highest paid designers in the United States in the early part of his career, he always early on made sexuality at least a sub-theme. Even here, in A Window for Bonwit Teller, where it's hard to see, we have only this one installation shot, but he scrawled the telephone number of a friend of his, a man who was complaining that he couldn't find other men to date. So he's always playing. But notably, when he begins to make what he would later claim is the beginning of his career as a fine artist, instead it turns to this, images like this 1961 painting called simply Wigs, drawn from a magazine advertisement for wigs. But what's notable is the choice of subject matter. Because at this very moment in Warhol's life, he's losing his hair. And he goes to a number of different people, talks to them about what he should do. People are talking about toupees and all sorts of different things. And Warhol decides that he's going to get a wig. But of course, classically Warhol, not a wig that is, as a wig is intended to do, blend with your natural hair, but the very converse, right? To perform the fact that he's wearing a wig. And so we see again and again that what Warhol finds in his subjects are things that resonate with him personally, even though they seem impersonal. After all, what's a wig advertisement but, the most impersonal of subjects? And here too, right? You notice on the far right of this image, nose reshaped. Warhol had just gone through an operation. He had rosacea on his nose, and he had just gone through an operation to have his nose worked on. And what does he do? But take, at exactly that same moment, an image, nose is reshaped. Here, another, one of those ubiquitous ads at the bottom, the back of a comic book, right? Telling you how you're going to strengthen your body through Jack LaLanne's course. But note what Warhol does, which is to selectively pull out or diminish aspects of the original to amp up its campy quality. So, strong arms and broad shoulders, it should read, but it instead reads strong arms and broads. And then should hands and fingers. And you see how he's cut the image of the strong man so that you don't see the pectoral muscles nearly as much, and cut it off right at the waist. Should hands and fingers, indeed. But one of the key points that I want to argue here is that what marks Warhol's choice of subjects is especially the moment at which a public figure's mask begins to slip. That moment when the public begins to understand that there's a distinction between a public self and a private self. And Warhol does that precisely because as he begins to embrace a high art or fine art career, he comes to realize that his public self and his private self are going to be pulled ever further apart. Indeed, literally, at the beginning of his first exhibition, when he had a group of collectors come to his home, he plays a record so loud as to impede talking. And he hands the visitors, who are presumably interested in buying art, masks. And he wears a mask himself. In other words, he constructs a scenario in which it's absolutely impossible to have normal human communication. And that's exactly what Warhol wanted, to prevent any form of normal, right, deep communication, to create himself, to perform himself merely as a mirror. So why does he pick this figure, Troy Donahue? This is the literal first silkscreen of all of Warhol's career. It's done in 1961-62. And he does it because there were rumors at this time, untrue, but rumors that Troy Donahue, who was at that point the sort of blonde California gay, he only becomes interested in Jackie Kennedy the week that the president is assassinated. And here in 16 Jackies, you'll note that there are images from before the assassination and images after. You can just know immediately which is which. Again, that moment when public and private begin to pull apart. Marilyn Monroe, again, only interesting to Warhol at the moment that the press begins to talk about her psychic pain. And of course, the division of the canvas into color and black and white, replicating that bipartite division, right, of selfhood. He even did an image of Cleopatra, the movie, precisely because there were constant swirling rumors that Elizabeth Taylor was behaving very badly on the set. Again, America's Sweetheart showing another side, the mask slipping. And then, brilliantly, classically Warhol, he comes to understand that even Marilyn's face isn't necessary to signify her, that it is in fact the mouth, the lips alone that make her. This is a remarkable image because it's so banal. It is in fact the director of the Mutual of Omaha Insurance Company, the photo drawn from the insurance company's brochure. And it's called This American Man, Watson Powell. And of course, Warhol is quite cheekily sending up the idea of American manhood. And this, a series of works simply called Dance Diagram, have long been considered very sort of curious images. People recognized pretty early on they were drawn from Arthur Murray Dance Studio dance diagrams for various kinds of dances. In this instance, a waltz. What was less known, and this tells us something about how successfully Warhol obscured Warhol's own intellect, is that it actually is drawn from this image by Robert Rauschenberg. He was a huge fan of Rauschenberg, as you're about to discover. And if you notice, that image was 1962. This image is 1952, 10 years before. And it was destroyed. But Warhol had seen it, and obviously it had lodged in his mind. And there you see the dance diagram, also from the Arthur Murray Studios. Do you see it? Maybe the pointer isn't working. No. But there it is in the bottom, right underneath the foot. And so he borrows that motif, a motif that in this instance is very much talking about homosexual relationships, because the image is called Should Love Come First, and it is actually Rauschenberg's own foot appended to a waltz diagram male position, a kind of male-male waltz, done exactly at the moment that he is divorcing his wife and becoming involved with his first partner, Cy Twombly. There's Rauschenberg. And it's called simply, and it's a remarkable heroicizing picture of Rauschenberg, because he looks very young and handsome, as if he was, as it were, on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, instead of a kind of down and out artist at the time, which he was. But it's called Let Us Now Praise Famous Men, 1964. Even images like this extremely controversial installation, which was done for the 1964 World's Fair, 1964 World's Fair in New York, which got Warhol into a great deal of trouble. It was up only 4 days. That's why we have such a bad shot of it. Robert Moses ordered that it be taken down. Warhol refused to take it down, but instead covered it with silver paint, again, turning it into a mirror. It's called simply Most Wanted Men, and it was taken from post office advertisements for various right criminals. But Warhol was selective in his choice of criminals and wanted his men to be good looking. And so Most Wanted Men functions right in two regards. It was precisely that, I think, that led Robert Moses to realize that a 5-story tall homoerotic advertisement on one of his fair buildings was not in his best interest. Warhol, of course, famously does these works. The Brillo boxes, the Del Monte, the Campbells. And they're made out of materials that, if you touch them, there's no confusion with the original, but right at a distance, really do look like the boxes from a supermarket. But note again how Warhol is processing the work of other artists. In this instance, somebody like Jasper Johns. Because Johns's American flag painting operates in very similar ways as the Brillo boxes, right? Which is to say that the artwork and the thing that it is taken to represent are the same. What is an American flag, after all, but an arrangement of red, white, and blue on canvas? And that's exactly what you have here. So it's raising the question, is this a painting of a flag or a flag? And similarly, is that a representation of a Brillo box or is it a Brillo box? This 1963 picture is called Do It Yourself Warhol. And after getting a certain degree of success, in fact, by 1964 he was by far the most famous artist in the world, he did a series of these, based, of course, on paint-by-number books, which were in those days widely available in dime stores, and blows them up and simply calls them Do-It-Yourself Warhol. And again, always attentive to other artists, he hides and camouflages both his intellectual and erotic interests. These were initially distributed simply as mixed media. But today they're called the piss paintings. And they're called the piss paintings because they were actually produced by using a particular paint that is photochemically reactive to urine. And so they were pissed upon. And they're, I think you'll agree, sort of stunningly beautiful abstractions. But again, it is an ironization, a camping of work like Jackson Pollock's famous abstract expressionist painting, where, right, throwing paint from his stick, he becomes the emblem of kind of masculine mastery. Well, what is somebody like Warhol, who will never be able to claim masculine mastery, going to do but to ironize it by literally pissing on it? This is Warhol's image, Race Riot. And it's really a puzzle, because it stands outside of a lot of Warhol's work for its embrace of a very critical news topic at exactly this moment. You all recognize, of course, I trust, that this is an emblem torn right from the headlines of the civil rights movement in the South, Sheriff Bull Connor Wright setting the dogs on the Freedom Riders. You can see that most clearly, of course, in the white. But we don't see that in Warhol. We do see news headlines, but they're news headlines of accidents or accidental deaths, not something that has a kind of political purpose. And one gets the sense that what was going on here so exercised Warhol that he momentarily allowed a crack in what he himself referred to as the indie suit, and let a little bit of himself come out. Notably, he made the image in red, white, and blue to amp up the irony of the fact that this was supposed to be freedom riders in America. I want to suggest that it is in this idea of pulling apart a public and a private self that Warhol's work almost invariably functions. And the question that Warhol is continuously engaged in is a question fundamentally of subversion. How do you get people to come to understand that what they're seeing may not be exactly right, what he means? He wants to inbuild a gulf between what he says and what he means. And in normal discourse, everyday conversation, we have a term for that gulf between what you say and what you mean. For example, if someone says in one tone, she had a beautiful dress, it would be a flat descriptive statement. But in another tone, she had a beautiful dress, it means something very differently. That framing, that way of marking a difference between what you say and what you mean, of course, goes by the name camp. And it's become a trope of queer culture. Warhol, in his famous Campbell soup cans, immediately after completing the Campbell soup cans, backed up that series with this image. Look carefully. Do you read it? He's divided Campbell such that what we read is camp. And I'm sorry, this is not intended as a plug for my book, but it just happens to be on the cover of it. I bring it in to show you that Warhol, again, tears the label very self-consciously, right? Such that what we read again is the word camp. Now, that's a remarkable achievement because, of course, you're only going to read the word camp if you were, as it were, predestined or accustomed to making those kinds of connections and readings. In other words, friends, family, members of a larger community that is broadly affiliated with him, including, of course, but not limited to other gay people, will read this as camp. But the straight world will have no idea. And that helps to make sense of this, the last portrait series that Warhol completed, just before his premature death in 1984. It's called Camouflage Self-Portrait. And it's a remarkable thing. Because you all know the point of a self-portrait, in fact, the reason that artists for millennia have been doing self-portraits, is that it offers an opportunity for the artist to know their soul, to dig deep, to convey for history exactly what they want us to know about them, to feel about them. And yet, at that incredibly naked moment, the moment of self-portraiture, Warhol gives us a press photograph, not one he took himself, that is, moreover, covered in camouflage. Making that mirror, even at the end of his life, apparent. Forcing us to recognize that any meaning in this image of Warhol's visage is meaning we necessarily bring to it. But notably, he also covers that image of his face, not just in camouflage, but in camouflage with, at least in our culture, notable social historical meanings, pink and red. And so, he's also playing with the idea of his sexuality, winking at us with it, in the way that he did all the way back at the very beginning of his career, before he had even really achieved any kind of success. A radio interview in which he did with the art critic and curator at the Metropolitan Museum, Henry Geldshaler, a friend of his. No matter what question the interviewer asked, and the poor interviewer was really trying to ask earnest questions, Warhol responded either yes or no, without regard to the question being asked. Finally, in frustration, the poor interviewer says, "Well, I guess that's it. Thank you very much, Mr. Warhol." And for the very first time, Andy Warhol says something other than yes or no. And in the campiest voice he can muster, he goes, "That's Miss Warhol." And what's notable about that is that wasn't his voice. He was performing a kind of queerness to his audience. So what I want to suggest here is that ultimately, what Warhol is doing is not just manifesting a distinction between public and private. He's doing something curiously activist, quietly activist. He's putting the closet on parade. He's making clear, not simply that he's closeted. If he was closeted, I wouldn't be talking about his sexuality. He's winking at us continuously. Camp, right? This American Man, Camouflage Self-Portrait in pink and red. He's always referencing his sexuality. But he's referencing that he is not talking about his sexuality. He's making evident the fact that we are uncomfortable with his queerness. And so that's the degree, finally, of activism that he came to embrace. One that didn't entail marching in the street, because when he started his career, there was no marching to be had. The defining event of the lesbian and gay liberation movement, Stonewall, was in 1969, almost a decade after he had begun. Rather, what he wanted to do was to catch us up in our own complicity with a system that allowed us to make a difference between what we know and what we acknowledge. In the final analysis, Warhol's art is the art that lives in the gulf between knowledge and acknowledgement. Thanks very much.
I'd really like to thank you for your passionate presentation and for the wonderful revelations that it brought to create a true understanding of Andy Warhol, or closer to that true understanding. Thank you very much. Please enjoy all of the festivities.
The Jim Foley fan club. Thank you very much. Make sure it's up here. Come on, Sam. See okay? Okay. There are others. Here they come. All right. I hijacked you. Jim, we just want to take this moment
I bet I'm really shiny.
to express our gratitude for what you've done with the art openings and the art happenings. It has been it's been just a joy for our community. You've skillfully crafted these beautifully choreographed evenings of art, music, food, and wonderful community. And we really thank you for that. And we're going to miss it unless someone knows how to follow in your footsteps. You're right there. Oh, good. Okay. Because I'm shaking, so I hope you. I just want to thank you. You know, I know that many people here could anticipated, like I did, to receive that beautifully glossy brochure twice a year, and when he did the 3 times a year with Arno, who I loved, and also Barbara Proud, it was always even a bigger thrill that we had a 3rd show for the year. So we really thank you for that. And want to thank you also that you diligently put together these shows at such a reasonable, almost, reasonable cost that everyone could enjoy, every socioeconomic level, students alike, and so we really appreciate that as well. We want you to turn around, because Colin, thank you very much, helped with putting together a little slideshow to commemorate you and to show our appreciation. So please, one other thing. One thing that the art happenings have happened, or that have, that have created this was our great friendship with Lisa and Jim, and we all appreciate that very much. So thank you. Please join me in thanking Jim for... So these are Jim's brochure covers over the last 9 years. Probably 9.5.
A while.
A while. We won't.
Beach.
Arno, I love that. Where are you at? My house. That's fine. Woo-woo.
Let's party.